All right, so we stopped at guiding students' reading development, so the various stages of their development throughout the research journey and how they should be reading relevant information, how much of information they should be reading, and so on. The next section is reading like a writer, because now you need to read, dissect, gather the information, and then you need to start writing and putting it into a proper structure. Focusing specifically on doctoral students, the following author suggests that supervisors direct their students to read for writing so that they notice different styles and tones adopted by writers who they are reading. So you also learn to write from the style of writing that you use is from the reading that you get, because as you read, you will see how the various authors present their work, the type of language they are using, the type of vocabulary they are using, the style of writing they are using as a researcher. We like to ask our doctoral researchers spend time considering the craft aspect of the text they use. We suggest they select a passage which epitomizes this quality of the writing they find difficult or admire, and then analyze it. A reminder of this is that all writing mobilizes voices from other texts. We hope that by establishing close encounters with well-written texts which students select and admire, they will take these voices into their own writing practices and make them their own as they literally rewrite their reading. So you learn how others are writing, and if you admire a specific writing style, then it's kind of um, you adjust and adapt to that kind of writing style to make your writing better. Because remember, these are published authors. They have a specific way of writing, and therefore they can also guide the way in which you write as a scholar. Sometimes helpful to provide structured guidance, we encourage our doctoral students to consider a range of technical matters such as how you construct your sentences, developing a syntax, and also how do you paragraph, what information goes into specific paragraphs. And remember, one paragraph needs to link and flow into the next paragraph. Because when you are narrating a story or writing an argument, you can't be all over the place in that. For example, one paragraph is talking about A and the other paragraph is talking about C. And there's no link between the two paragraphs, yet one follows the other. So there's got to be that flow, that link from one paragraph to the next. Reading in a group, the authors also suggest that postgraduate students may find reading groups helpful for both reading and writing. It's much like how I told you to work in groups. It's easier when you're reading with each other, because something that you read, you may have missed out on. Another student in that group would have picked up on it and then fills in the gaps, right? So you may have left it out, another student picked it up, and then you'll learn from each other, right? Individual supervisors can foster change in either doctoral writing or master's writing practices by supporting reading and writing groups. When discussing multiple texts in reading groups, it is not hard to foreground questions of writing or reading like a writer. This might include a focus on choreography, the design in which dancing is done, for example, how you choreograph, and because with choreography, it's using an example of choreography, which is how you dance, right? The steps of the design that you follow in order to um, do that entire dance sequence. So much like that dance sequence that you are choreographing, when you are reading and when you are writing and putting things into text, it also has to have a design. It has to have a flow where one step leads to the next step, and then eventually you have this beautiful sequence of dance that follows. Okay, so that's basically the example that you're using. Much like your research as well, step-by-step flow so that when you reach the outcome or the end of this dissertation, you have a beautiful sequence of arguments that lead to a particular outcome. The ways in which argument is carried between the chapters and within each one or is built up through the section of your specific journal that you are reading. The ways in which headings and subheadings and paragraph sentences begin and carry out your argument at the end, like I said, step by step, having a flow, much like a choreographed dance. Or focus on languages used, for example, searching for ways in which the writer uses different metaphors, figurative reading, figurative words, quotes, similes, and so on, the type of sentence construction that you use, examining the ways in which the writer has bright color and shade to write through the use of vivid languages. Like I said, some of us are more visual. Instead of just writing black and white, we would add different fonts, different colors. We spoke about this. Is it distracting? Is it accepted? I think, Tony, you brought up something about if the examiner or the moderator of that particular dissertation or thesis is colorblind and you have, different colors, but they wouldn't see that particular color. Or maybe like how some people are color sensitive and if you're putting something that's highlighted in white or highlighted in red, I think then it becomes a bit of a problem for that examiner, but the person reading the work. Also, it can be distracting. Some people don't like a lot of pictures and colors and so on, which is visual representation. But you know what? Unfortunately, that is how the researcher or the writer chose to write their story or write their dissertation. I mean, much like myself, like I said, very visual. I like my headings to be different font. My in text I'm following the normal, which is either Times New Roman or Arial 12, whatever the case may be. Headings are 14, I think. Some headings are 14, but I use color. My headings, subheadings are different colors, different fonts, bold. I use a lot of visuals, a lot of graphs, a lot of charts. I will draw a lot of flow charts and stuff like that. But that's just how I am. It's how I represent my work because that's the type of researcher I am or learner that I am. More visual than someone that's writing a narrative. And like we said, when we mentioned before, it can be distracting, but it's how you present your work, right? Um, Debating the words of titles and heading, deciding on what titles and subheadings that we need to use. It often becomes a bit difficult as to when we are structuring now, when we're going into the writing process, we read, we gather the information, we now need to start writing, right? And how do we form the main titles and headings, subheadings, and so on? That becomes a bit difficult. Reading groups can create a motivation for students to read text outside their usual ambit in order to advance their own and group's general understanding. Reading that is both wide and deep enriches discussion of research findings as a contribution to the wider field of knowledge and production. When you're working in groups, it actually helps. I remember when I was doing, that time it was a BTech, and we were doing research methodology as a module, right? So that time with BTech, I think was NQF level 7, which needed to be bridged by 8 to your master's. So at that level, doing research methodology, we worked in groups because remember, it's research we're doing for the first time. You overwhelmed, your anxiety is through the roof because this is venturing into the unknown. And here now you have to start writing scientifically, technically, reading articles that you've never read before, dissecting information, collecting information from there to build your own argument. I mean, it was a lot of work that we had to do aside from the fact of the person that's teaching us how to do the methodology, design, how to write up a literature, how to write up an introduction, and so on. right? So and this lecture actually put us into groups. So when you're working into groups, we tend to read what's there, like I said, something that, say, for example, Eureka and Tony, you are in the same group, Rizmati and Masatuka, you are in another group. So, right, those are the groups that we're working with. And then Eureka and Tony, your views or what you read, you missed out some of the stuff that you're already reading the same thing, right? Same article, dissecting it, want to write a report on it. But what Matsuchuka and Rizumati would have picked up was something that you guys, Eureka and Tony, would have missed out on. So by working in groups and sharing of that information and the ideas that you found from the same article that you all are evaluating, you help each other, right? So merging the groups together, all sitting together. So it's like two separate groups, same information, same tasks that you were all given, but all came out with different ideas. And then you learn from each other, from those various different ideas that you had come up with or picked up while you were doing this reading. Below is an example of the value of reading in a group. Eureka, you want to read this for us? We're on page 43. Just that snippet.
Sorry, I'm just trying to open. Okay, page 43, which is my apprenticeship. Okay. My apprenticeship as a researcher began early in my honours year in a small reading group, which was addressed at its first meeting by an applied English language studies doctoral student. She had been researching the effectiveness of study groups and shared ideas on how to make a reading group work to each member's benefit. That evening, I learned a valuable lesson as I observed how other students in the group quickly found and extracted the most salient points in the text we were reviewing. Many of the assignments designed by applied English language studies lecturers and the assessment rubrics which accompanied them enabled students to choose our own focus of interest. So in much of my reading, I was able to explore English foreign language teaching and EFL teacher education. Before the end of the first semester, I came across a topic which was to become the focus of both my honours and master's research projects: context-sensitive post-method EFL pedagogy.
Thank you so much for that. So let's unpack this, right? What was a valuable lesson that was learned by this researcher? Exactly what I just mentioned now. If we had two separate groups, right? And then what you pick up from that is the group finds and extracts salient points of the same assignment that they are all given, but everyone has their own different viewpoints, which you share with each other because one person may have missed out on that point, but it's something that is pertinent and valuable for your research. So that is why even when you're working on assignments and so on, it's stuff that you learn from each other. You may have left it out, may have just skimmed through it, or your anxiety got the better of you. You missed out a certain section. But by working in groups, whether it's reading groups, writing groups, assignment groups, you're helping each other improve on your skills. I will pick up something that you may have missed out, but I'm still sharing it with you, with that group. Some of the activities that would support reading: asking questions, making notes, and so on. Can I summarize the meaning of this article in my own words? Yes. What do I already know about this? What don't I know about this? How does my research relate to this? It's always connecting it and linking it. That is why we say we always go back to the research questions, your problem statement, your objectives, and so on. See how it links. What connections can I make to other readings? And this is where I said, you're reading an article, it's relevant to your study, but then you've got more articles that that author had referenced. That's your starting point. You go to that reference list and go and look at what authors they had referenced. Okay, and then you can also do that reading that connects. Do I agree with the author's argument? This is where we said you're comparing to the argument. Is it completely in contrast to what you are doing? Matching it? Is it similar to what you are doing? What do I want to know more about? What is missing? What are the gaps? What ideas related to my research has this article generated? Why are you reading this article? Because you found something interesting, it was relating to your topic. Now you want to see, is it related ideas? Can I give examples from my own research to relate to what the text is saying? Yes, we can. This is where we say you have to build your own argument. You must have your own voice. Much like the example that I gave of a student that asked me, I have my own ideas and it is me writing this. Why do I have to have it supported by a reference? And I think we discussed this in the first lecture or something. And so, like I said, it's you have your own voice. It's valid. You're making a valid point, and like I said, it's generally questioned as to, but why do I have to say this author reference? Use its authors as a reference when I'm the one that's saying this work, and then we often tell the student, but it came from somewhere. The idea must have come from somewhere, and that is why we say it is your excuse me, it is your voice. But this author is not taking away your voice. This author is basically concurring. That author or authors are agreeing with what you are saying. We're not saying we're taking your voice away. Write down what you are saying. This is the point I'm trying to make. It is my voice. It's me as a researcher. But this author, for example, Smith 2024, concurs or agrees with what you are saying. So just builds a better argument because somebody now is supporting your argument. That is why I always say you write your claim first, supported by what somebody else is saying. So is it relevant to the study? Can I draw diagrams and find metaphors to show what the text is saying? Yes. All of these things, all of these questions that you ask yourself, make notes, ask these questions. Everything is relevant in order for you to build on your research. There is no right or wrong way. As much as supervisors say, do this, do something this way, follow this format, follow this template. But I obviously a bit more free when it comes to research in that I always tell the student, this is your research. Only you know the content. Only you know what you're trying to investigate. You know what the problem is because you've seen the problem occurring in most of our students are employed, so they conduct the study in their organizations or within that particular industry because they have access to those companies when they're conducting the studies. So only you would know. I do not, I know your topic. I can guide you on what needs to go into it, but you physically know those processes. You probably work on that production line, for example, or you are working as a manager, you've encountered it, it's your voice, it's your experience. It's you writing everything. So it's not that you have to follow. I'm not saying don't listen to your supervisor, but there's no right or wrong way. There's various different ways of doing research, and everyone's got their own style of conducting research. Everyone's got their own style of supervising. I've come across, and they've got their own way of marking and examining and moderating and so on. You come across a lot of people, and we learn from that. Some of them are good habits, some of them are bad habits, but we are mature enough, educated, experienced enough, senior enough to know what is right and what is wrong. or the right and wrong ways of doing it. What are good and what are bad habits? Any questions up until this point? Okay, so it further goes on to many of these questions can be answered in the following table. Also offers guidance for how you take notes and focus on different reading. How you do referencing, giving full reference, including the publisher, place of publication, page number, etc. So this is the reference list. You reference every author that you've used. In text referencing, you put the author's surname and the year. Depending on the style of referencing, we spoke about style of referencing. Different disciplines have different methods of referencing. In your introduction, what are the key arguments that you are trying to make in terms of, like we said, you know there's a problem, you identified a research gap, we using objectives to achieve that, we answering research questions to lead us to a specific outcome. What in the conclusion, what are the key messages, recommendations, improvements, and so on, achievement of objectives we're trying to have in this conclusion? Describing an article, a chapter in a paragraph, giving context of what the problem is, and so on. And this stems from the introduction, describing the work that you want to do, and also telling us that there's a gap that exists. This is the method I want to use to collect the data in order to analyze it to close that gap or minimize. Collecting the evidence, how you conduct the study. Also evidence of what other authors are saying in terms of your literature review. Evaluation of paper and chapter. Am I convinced of the argument and evidence that I have read? What can I use from the article that I've just read? How much of information am I dissecting that is relevant to my study? How is this paper or chapter relevant to my study? Again, looking at the abstract or reading the entire paper and looking at what are the similar trends that this paper is bringing about that's going to assist or link up to your study. Well, how is it related? If not, then look at the reference list at the end of that paper, and maybe those papers are a bit more relevant than the one that you're actually reading currently. Reading to comprehend. Okay, it's one thing to just read and write down, but how much of the information do you comprehend and understand in detail? And are you adding the relevance of your study into it? Okay, some of the processes characterized of a proficient reader is in the following table. Making a connection to prior knowledge. This is where we said reading so that you can understand, dissect, evaluate what is already existing. So literature that is already there, which is also known as prior knowledge, existing literature, existing knowledge that's there that you need to read, because these studies came from somewhere. Unless it's completely new, where you don't have enough information and stuff. And we do have studies that are like that, mostly at doctoral level, where it's completely new information, original work that you are doing, first time that you are doing this work, and you are adding, where you develop your own research framework. Generating questions. Comprehension is to a significant degree, a process of inquiring. Proficient readers pose questions to themselves as they read. Asking questions is the art of carrying out an inner conversation, because you are reading this particular article, you think it's relevant to your study. What value is it adding? How am I meeting my objectives? Am I answering my research questions? What conclusions am I hoping to achieve out of this? What improvements can be made? So you kind of having this conversation with yourself to comprehend what you are reading and then put it down into an argument. Visualize and create sensory mental images. You can even draw out your own images of what the author is trying to say. Making inferences, much of what is to be understood in the text must be inferred. Authors rely on readers to contribute to a text meaning by linking their background knowledge to information that's already in the text. So, reading, understanding, but read with a critical eye. Because remember, when you are writing either a narrative, an argument, or you're debating or comparing and contrasting, you got to be critical as to the information that you are taking out of that to build your argument, therefore making an inference to particular authors. Determine the importance of the information that you are reading. Our memories quickly overload unless we are part down a text to an essential idea. This is why you always write down your important facts, always noting down, because as you're reading, you make notes, because that's how you plan out how you're going to structure when you start writing the actual chapter. So it's important now to identify what are main themes, important aspects, and information that you want to have. Make notes, write down, whether it's on a notepad, whether you're doing it digitally, whether you're typing it on your phone, doing little post-its. I normally have like little post-its, and I'm always writing on charts and notepads and just sticking it all over my wall. That's how I would gather information. But it's also an overload because you're reading and reading and reading, and it's a lot that your mind has to absorb. You can't retain all that information. You have to write it down in some form, any format that you're using. Even if you dictate it to yourself on your phone and you save it on your phone as a recording, it's still a form of note taking. Synthesizing the ideas that you've read, proficient readers identify the essence of a text and organize these ideas into a coherent summary of meaning. So, drawing a flow chart, writing down your thoughts, writing down what you have evaluated. Then monitor reading and apply fix up strategies. Um, Proficient readers watch themselves as they read and expect to make adjustments in their strategies to ensure that they are able to achieve satisfactory understanding of the text. Do we understand everything that we have read? That is why. And you can't always remember everything that you've read. That is why note taking is so important, so that it helps you to understand that build up of all the information that you have been reading up until this point. Remember, at this point, we're only planning, we have not started writing. The reading leads to the writing. Everyone with me up until this point? All right, moving on, 3.6. Guiding the postgraduate students reading at a research proposal stage. So this is also quite important and quite crucial at this stage because the proposal is very important. Because for the onset of the proposal, you are telling us the study that you want to undertake. I am proposing what research I want to do. This is the topic that I have chosen for the specific research area. I'm introducing my topic, but how do I introduce the topic when I don't have, as a novice, I don't have background on how to write. So writing up of the, like I said, introduction, problem statement, objective research questions, significance of the study, scope of the study, and so on. Giving a brief literature review, giving a brief methodology and design, how you're going to conduct the study, because we're saying we're proposing this is the study we want to do, but then we also need to show that there's related literature out there. That's how your literature survey is done. And then we also need to show that this is how we will conduct the study that we are proposing to do. When students first register for a study, they need to read, find focus of their project. So this is why I tell students, a lot of them come to me for topics. I do give them topics. I give them research areas, focal areas. They develop their own topics based on that particular research area. Alternatively, a lot of them do the reading beforehand, develop their own topics, and then they come to us and then they're like, okay, I want to register, I want to apply for this program, this is my topic. And then we start guiding them by giving them the template for the proposal and so on. I think UJ has a standard template for the proposal, which we submit for faculty higher degrees approval of the study. So yeah, that's what students do. They read beforehand. Some of them will come to us and ask for topics. And yeah, that's how they develop their topics. The more you read, the more you understand. And you'll understand the content of your work a lot better. Um, the authors also make an argument about writing a literature review, okay, working with literatures. And a lot of the conversation this morning was about literature. And the reason why we looked at literature review is because a lot of your reading comes from to build up that literature review. So you have to read a lot of information to have a literature review. At a master's level, okay, at this point, let's look at the honors level. At the honors level, student always asks me, how many pages for a literature review? How many pages? And I always tell them it's not the quantity, but the quality, because you can write 10 pages of absolute nonsense, or you can write 10 pages that is good, solid, and a good, solid argument or narrative, right? You can put a lot of irrelevant information just to make up. Or you can have 5 pages and have the best literature review ever. It's how you write that argument. A few things will stand out about the phrase, which is writing of the literature review. First, it is singular, preceded by the article, suggesting that the singular object of importance which occurs in one place in thesis conventionally forms the second chapter of your thesis or dissertation. Whether we are talking about one or multiple, like we mentioned, we didn't want to just be in the singular, we wanted to also add multiple authors to it to show that it's a better argument. It is linguistically marked as a unified piece of writing rather than being used throughout the dissertation. Also, students look at when you are now putting your thoughts down to paper, is it past tense, present tense? So what is the tense in which you are writing your proposal or your literature review? As I know with the chapter 3 as well, what is the tense that you are using? Because chapter 3, you are telling us the type of method you're going to use to conduct the study. Even more worrying is an implication that the writing of the reviews occurs only once at the beginning of the doctoral research with only minor editing. There is no doubt that at some outset of the doctoral candidature, an intensive immersion in literature is essential. So when we start off, it's not only at the doctoral level. I'm not sure why they're only mentioning the doctoral level, but at honors and at master's level, in the introduction, when you are doing the proposal, you actually do a brief literature. So the brief literature is about a page or just under a page, right? It does not consist of like major headings, subheadings, and so on. It's just a narrative telling us that this is some of the literature that is out there. And then you expand on that literature when you go into your chapter 2. One moment for me, please. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so these are the things that we look at the various levels, not just at the doctoral stage. So you still have to read in order to develop your introduction, your background to the study. Doing that brief literature which forms part of your proposal stage, still a lot of reading that needs to go into it. So I think we kind of understand a lot more now about what your student is required to do as a reader before we even write. And then it goes on to how much is enough. How much of information can we actually gather? How much of information can we actually read? And when do you stop? It's never enough. Reason being is, and I've had this happen with me doing my own studies, publishing, guiding students as a supervisor. You will go as far as your results. You've collected the data, you're analyzing the results, and then you find out that there's something that you picked up in the results that you want to add onto your literature because it's something that's missing, but it's something that you picked up when you were collecting data and you're analyzing the results. Okay, now we have to read again, start writing. So it doesn't stop. At one stage, I think when I was doing my master's, I had 7 revisions. That's actually minimal compared to one of my other students who went on to like version 15 or 16 of just one chapter, which was the literature review. So that is why reading and writing is so important in research, and how you do it is so important is because you will have so many rewrites and versions of particular chapters. And in this case, when I was doing my master's, I had about 7 or 9 versions of the literature review because by the last review or last version that I had, which may have been 8 or 9 or whatever the case may be, I had added so much and not irrelevant information, but when you do the study, you analyze your results after you've collected the data, then you find more gaps that you never mentioned in the literature, and you find more gaps that you haven't mentioned in your chapter 1, and then you go back to it. Have you found yourselves doing that, either as a student or as a supervisor with your students? You're moving back and forth through the chapters. You always come back to add or take out or amend. Anyone?
Yes, I think you cannot work in any other way.
Yeah.
When I was sort of writing my own stuff, I couldn't understand why my supervisor said to me, listen, we're going to go back to chapter
Yes.
1 at the end.
Yes.
I thought, no, what the hell? I want to finish off chapter
Finish.
1,
Yeah.
tick it off, chapter 2,
Yes.
tick it off.
Yeah.
And I've seen now with the students too, they don't, they write in the beginning that they're going to use school A in such and such a township, and they're going to speak to 10 teachers. In the next chapter, this town has now moved, or the school has moved, and the teachers have grown.
Yes.
Or because of that, they need to go back all the time. But for my mind at first, it was very difficult to understand because I
Why?
like
Yeah.
a process,
I was the
but a
same.
linear process,
Yes.
not this
And
Glenn
we were so, I think because we're so set in our ways, and this is how things were done, finish your chapter 1, get it out of the way, we're done. We're not coming back to it. We move to the next chapter. So very systematically, go in sequence. Then we did our chapter 2, which was our literature, over and done with, moved on to chapter 3. But that's not the case, because as you go and as you progress as either a researcher or a supervisor, like I said, there's gaps that you find that you missed out. So my study is showing this, my results are showing this, but it's not reflected in my literature. I'm not mentioning it in the literature. Or it's meeting the objectives, but there's still a gap. Then I go back to my chapter 1 and I mention the research gap again. I go and amend. So you back and forth to different chapters and it doesn't end. That is why we say, is it enough? When is it enough? When do you stop? Or do you just carry on and on and on and on? So that is the context that we are looking at when we say, how much is enough? How much do we continue reading, writing, and so on, right? I think it's until you are satisfied as a student or as a researcher in this case, right? Okay, which takes us to 3.7, guiding the postgraduate students' reading and organization of literature. So you're reading, now you need to organize everything before you write. And this is where I said, drawing that plan, doing that conceptual framework, builds, it helps you structure your subheadings, your headings, your subheadings, and so on, right? And then as you're reading articles, you find more headings and subheadings that you want to develop and use. Which takes us to activity 2.3. Write a metaphor for or make a visual representation of your own experience of working with literatures for research purpose. How did you organize and plan out your entire research? Write a metaphor. You can even do a visual representation. Like I said, when I was writing that document and I gave you the topic and I said, okay, fine. This is how I have done the work. This is how I make my students do a conceptual framework. But obviously, I would change this into a flowchart, okay, giving you a visual representation. So your activity would be something along these lines. That's why I showed it to you, okay? Or writing a metaphor and explaining this is how I will go about working with literatures for my research purpose. Everyone with me? You're going to have time after this again. Take the initiative, set up your teams if you have time today, or if you have tomorrow, then just work in your groups like what you did last week and help each other go through each of those activities. Thumbs up. 3.3, will you manage? Anyway, you get stuck, just email me and then I will guide you more through it if you get stuck through anything, right? But I think as a perspective from a supervisor side guiding your student, you have more than sufficient experience, even as an up and coming supervisor, you know how you want to guide your students, how you want to help students with different reading, writing, learning skills and abilities that they have. All right. Continuing with 3.7. Guiding the postgraduate student reading and organizing of the literature, putting everything into perspective, ways of organizing the literature. Like I said, for me, it was giving them, Eureka was using that spider web. Tony was linking it to the research quest, directly linking to research questions. I was using a conceptual framework. So various methods that guide the student. So advice from various authors, which you can read on your own, on how to just guide your students. So that you can read on your own, but when you do eventually read it on your own, what I want you to reflect on right now is you as a supervisor, right? How do you teach your students to organize their literature? Because remember, we need to build it in order to start writing. And I always say, take down notes. And this table of helps in that it groups articles. So what I tell them to do is, well, we have access to computers. We open folders. We name our folders, group it into the various sections. If you can remember the example, when you go back to the recordings, you look at the example that I gave you on the conceptual framework, and then you'll write down, this is what Smith 2020 said, this was the topic of that article I used. These are the concepts relating to my study that I picked up, and how is it linked to my study? Start unpacking that, because now you need to organize everything so you can start writing. Do you think this is something that is going to be helpful? This table that we are looking at, unpacking and helping students to organize. So number one, grouping the articles or chapters by concept. Is that something you could use in your discipline? That table. Anyone? You can unmute and talk. Yes, Tony?
Yes, Prof. I think this is a useful table. As I said, I like trying to center my students around the research questions, aims and objectives. And another element is the themes and the core topics. This is helpful for them also because when they have to look at the literature review, they need to unpack the research based on themes and concepts, and they need to ensure that they've fully covered the ground in terms of the canon in the various themes. So this is very, very useful. I just wanted to comment on point number two. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but
No, it's fine.
the use of chronology is important, very important for some disciplines, because I know within our discipline we have limited students to a certain period of time. So I think 10 years has become the standard.
Yes,
So we're looking at now, since we're in 2024, students are limited to about 2014 in
2040,
terms
yes.
of most relevant and most state of the art readings. So that would also be very important for them to still have the literature, even if it's older, but to understand the limitations around that.
Most definitely, because okay, you guys are going 10 years. Faculty of Engineering and Management, faculty, well, it's not management, it's College of Business and Economics right now. Um, Even Faculty of Science, we use 5 years and we push it and we say don't go further than 7 years. You guys still allowing 10 years. With textbooks, a bit more flexible in that you can go beyond the 5 years, especially for textbooks. But when it comes to conference proceedings, journals, book chapters, and stuff like that, we allow, or the accepted chronology is 5 years, 5 to 7 years. That's what we say. Because then it becomes completely outdated information, especially if using an author from, for us, 2012 or 2009. The research that's been done since has really improved. So whatever you are referencing to in 2009 and 2012, completely outdated. We would have definitely improved on processes and so on from there. So yes, the coming to point number two. So point number one is grouping the articles, and you don't have to do it in this order or put it in table. It does help, especially when you're doing comparative studies. It does help to compare authors, and also put in this table format. But I generally, as a practice, tell them open out different folders for different headings, subheadings, and then group your articles in there. So it gives you more of some kind of control and organization for when you're eventually going to do your write-up. Organizing the literature chronologically, and we say that you have to start with, this is what I said, 2018, 2020, then 2024. Because you can't have 2024 concurring and then you bring in 2018 afterwards. It's going backwards. So here it says key authority would be start with 1980, then move on to you building your story. 1985, 1986, 1987 until current, right? Developing your literature contextually when you are guiding your student, generally what I would do is I call it an inverted pyramid. And I always tell my students to do this, going back to this Word document. Inverted Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, funnel effect or an inverted pyramid, right? Upside down triangle. So you start with a very broad approach, which is the opening at the top. If you know what a funnel is, So it starts with the opening at the top, which is quite broad. And this is where we say contextualize it. So when I tell my students, look at what is being done globally, right? That opening now obviously becomes a broader perspective, which is the global context or perspective. Then you narrow it down. You can see on a funnel or this inverted pyramid, it starts getting a bit narrow. So when it gets a bit narrow, you now break it down into what is done in developing countries or in Africa. So from a global perspective, we now narrowed it down. You can even put it in a form of a table like the one that's shown above. Um, then we narrow it even further to the funnel effect, where you are now funneling out what is being done in South Africa, because the South African perspective is where your research is being conducted. That is why we say contextualize. So this is all organizing and planning of your literature that you want to put into your research. Organizing it thematically so you can pick up various trends and themes that occur, whether it's a modern concept, post-modernization concept, and so on. You determine the type of theme that it's going to take, especially when it comes to art, English literature studies, and so on. There's a lot of um, thematical research that you can get. Global to local, like we said, unpack it on a global scale, debate it, for example, going right down to filter it down or funnel it down to the South African perspective. Unpack what the concept or theme is. In this case, giving you an example of poverty. How does poverty exist? What can we do in terms of poverty in having those that go hungry? We do feeding schemes, try and create more job opportunities if it is possible, and so on, right? So it's giving us now unpacking the concepts and showing you what is the significance of the study that's being conducted. Make a claim and provide evidence. This is where I kept saying, state your claim, use your voice as a researcher, and then reference it by one or two authors, preferably two, because it builds a better argument. Pose a problem and work out what your potential solution would be. What is the potential outcome? Because we know we want to conduct the study, and we said, okay, fine, this is the potential outcome that we would want to have. Like, for example, we said impact or role of TQM on organizational performance. And the outcome we're looking at is organizational performance. What are we hoping to achieve on organizational performance? Do we want to improve it? Show that these TQM practices actually lead to some kind of improvement on the performance of an organization. That was the aim of the study. So we know now this is the problem we're experiencing. We want to use the practices to improve that organizational performance. Argument and counter argument. This is where you have opposing thoughts, contrast, comparing with other authors, and you build a solid argument based on that. So it gives you steps on how to guide the study and how to organize and write up your various literatures of your various chapters. Any questions up until this point? Then we can move on to, I'm going to go quickly through the plagiarism and stuff like that so I can move on to unit 4. I'm going to give you a bit of a break and then we move on to unit 4. Yeah, because plagiarism is something that we already know about. Questions, comments, clarity? Anyone? Hands up. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Are you good? I think this module is quite interesting in that it teaches us a lot on how to guide our students. Because we don't really know, like we have our own ways of doing things. Like I said, we should know now which is right, which is wrong, the good and bad habits that we pick up along the way, and how to improve as a researcher ourselves, and how to improve our ways of supervising. We don't realize And I'm sure that some of you can relate to this. And I even brought it to your attention when I was doing the honor students evaluation. And I was like, some of them didn't have that research methodology background from the BTech or advanced diploma levels, you know. It made it difficult. I just assumed. And when I continued with it, I need to find out now students needed individual attention because I had to take them from scratch. They didn't know the background to research and they were completely lost. And you don't really know what the student's going through and you don't know what their background is. Some need a lot more guidance than others. Okay, if there isn't any questions, we're going to move on 3.8, something that is familiar to all of us. This is based on plagiarism and how to avoid plagiarism. And we know that we're looking at various policies that our universities, respective universities, will follow when it comes to plagiarism. We spoke about Turnitin and we spoke about using AI tools, paraphrasing tools, writing tools, and so on, right? It's not too warrant to say that it is incorrect, but use it in an ethical manner. All right. We know that plagiarism is taken very seriously. We've had, if you have been found guilty, or if a student has been found guilty, or staff has been found guilty of plagiarizing, do you know that there's actually legal action that the universities take because of that? And it's quite serious. I think that is why we have policies in place because of how critical this is. Which takes us to activity 3.4 on plagiarism. Reflect on all your experiences of your academic reading and writing from your first year as a student to your current reading and writing at the moment. Have you ever been guilty of plagiarism and either intentionally or unintentionally? Because sometimes we write and it can be unintentional, we don't realize it. But then it's intentional as well, where you know it's wrong, but you still pass it off as your own. In a paragraph, give your views on the quotation below and the views on plagiarism expressed in the sections that follow, right? A pedagogy for plagiarism and referencing needs to include, firstly, a negotiation of shared meaning around what constitutes as plagiarism. Secondly, the development of policy and demonstration material as a reference point for practice and mediation is essential. So let's look at that because you are going to write a paragraph based on that. Sometimes, and some of us are guilty of it. We may do it intentional, unintentional. We may have actually experienced something of seeing someone else plagiarizing. There's also something that's called self-plagiarism. So aside from the Turnitin, are you able to pick up when something has been plagiarized? And when you are supervising your students, whether it's at honors master's or doctoral level, what is your approach to teaching your students about plagiarism? How do you go about doing that? Anyone? Or how would you if you are a potential supervisor? Anyone wants to share some experiences? Anyone? Mr. Martin? Asatuka? Victoria? Yeah?
With the undergrads, I've had activities where we find a number of sentences and then we ask them to kind of write them in their own words, putting in stressing on the point that some of the terms can stay the same, but the language can differ so that the meaning of what you're trying to say is not lost from the original text. So we have an activity where we have like a number of sentences from different journals that they then have to rewrite in their own way, and that's kind of to teach them how to put the idea from someone in their own words without necessarily plagiarizing.
Well, which is a good practice because, and you touched on something which is important, which is that we don't know how much of paraphrasing changes the entire context of that sentence or paragraph. Then it takes you completely away from what you're actually trying to say in the study. You know, we paraphrase so much that you lose the essence of what you are trying to say. And yes, teaching students to paraphrase correctly, teaching students about plagiarism and how important and critical it is, whether intentional, unintentional. And like I said, there's only so many times you can paraphrase something until you lose the essence of it completely. I think that it's where we need to really teach the students how to construct sentences. It's better to so what they do is they copy. This is what I've picked up over the years. Sometimes they'll copy a piece of text and then they try to put it through the paraphrasing tool and then it changes completely. However, if you're reading the text, I suggest to the students that try writing it into your own words when you see the text. Don't copy it into a paraphrasing tool. Don't try to rewrite it. Read the sentence and then reconstruct. And it has been working fairly well. I wouldn't say really well. It's okay. It helps. But now with all these tools that are out there, it makes it a bit difficult because students just take the easy way out. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, so teaching your students, so that's basically, Masatuko, what we're saying is teaching your students how to avoid plagiarism. And I think it's taken at that novice stage when they first come into the system. It's one of the things you teach them first before they even read or write in a specific way for research. They need to learn about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? How critical it is? What is fraudulent about it? What are the implications that um, we go through, legal implications as our for our specific universities, um, and you know the legal actions that can be taken against them if they decide that they want to plagiarize. But then you also have not only plagiarizing from other authors, you also have what is called self-plagiarism. Now, self-plagiarism, I learned about this when I was doing my PhD, right? I had published just before I submitted my PhD and didn't realize now I used work from my master's. I referenced myself, right? But I said, because it's my own work, I took it as is. So, like unintentional. 'Cause at the time, I didn't know what self plagiarism was and didn't know it existed. I knew there was something called plagiarism, but for me, at that point, I understood it as it's my work. So I'm putting my work, referencing myself from my master's into my PhD because it was kind of continuation, right, of the study that I was doing. Only to be told that no, I'm supposed to paraphrase myself because the work has already been published, already been submitted for exams. I passed, I got my master's now. I'm copying what I did, but I was trying to make an argument, but it's my own work, you know. How can I plagiarize myself? And that's when the whole concept of self-plagiarism came about. And then I had to understand now that, you can't just take your own work because it is your work, but you still self-plagiarizing. So that's also something that's fraudulent and to take into consideration, which we don't really teach our students about. Like I said, it's a concept that I didn't even know. Masatuka?
Prof, with self-plagiarism, in an instance where a student is repeating a module and naturally the activities or the assignments are, if not the same, very similar, and then they
Yeah.
resubmit the work that was done in the previous year, is that also self-plagiarism?
Oh, that's a tough one. So if I understand it correctly, it's an assignment that is given, right?
Yes.
And the student is repeating the module, so it's a similar assignment. And I don't think they can, because remember you failed, right? the way I see it is, it's like you've done a, let me give you an example. You did a topic for your master's. You can't use the same topic and do a PhD because you've already been examined and passed. In this case, the student has already been examined and failed, but is still submitting the same work. Now that he's repeating, I don't think that should be allowed. It should actually be new work that the student is doing. So it kind of is like a copy and paste. Tony?
Prof, I'd like to just chip in and with this scenario that is being presented.
Yeah.
Well, the general practice with, I don't know if this is across the board, but within our
Yeah.
faculty, the general practice is that coursework modules done at an honors level and at a master's level have to be rotated and changed every year. So a student who fails this year will generally not get to do the same module next year. But in the case of that, which was presented in the case where the student, let's say, takes an abeyance of studies, and maybe they've done the module and they come back 2 years later, and now we're doing like the same course, or we've cycled back to the same courses,
Yeah.
then that student would generally, number one, not be allowed to present the same
Yes.
assignment answer. It would be
Yeah.
flagged as plagiarism, but also it wouldn't be suggested if that's what got them failed in the first place.
That's my point. Exactly. You failed it already. You can't pass off the
Yeah,
same work
so
again now. Yeah.
within the revisions, they would have been told already that this resembles something. If let's say the module coordinators are the same people, if they are able to pick up that, no, you did this 2 years ago, or
2
you did
years,
this
yeah.
previously. Yeah, but generally, if it was allowed, then it would still fall under self-plagiarism, and then the 10% rule would still count.
Yeah, yeah. I would also agree with that. We have, well, with us, our faculty, what happens is that you are allowed to repeat the module the following year. So if you, for example, operations management 1, you fail it, and then you can repeat it in the following year, right? But whatever assignments you had done when you failed, right, you cannot now go, and there's a reason you failed it. Or even if you passed it, it's much like you can't go and repeat the same work the following year,
Prof,
right? Yes.
I agree with you. Once again,
I can't hear you.
well, I agree with you. I'm just thinking that if a person has submitted something, submitted a document for an exam or whatever, but especially if it was online, it would have been put through Turnitin then.
Yeah.
So if this person puts it through Turnitin again, it should pick it up as plagiarism.
It should. Yes. Yes. Masatuka, does that answer you? All the
Yes, it
points
does.
of
Thank you,
view?
Prof.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on, that is why I said I'm going through this very fast because, like I said, we all know about plagiarism. I think it's one of the first things that we speak to our students about. I actually do an entire workshop for the honors students because, like I said, coming into the system for the first time doing research, they need to know about plagiarism. They need to know the plagiarism policy. I also, when they submitting their final submissions, even as they submit their chapters, I have a plagiarism declaration template that they sign. And they signing to take ownership of the work to say that it is original work. And it's part of their learner guide. So those are the steps that we go through. Even with the master's and doctoral students, it is a declaration of plagiarism. Whether it's your original work, you sign it, and they actually sign off on it, and it becomes like, I think, the page after their cover page. And then on that declaration, it also says where generative AI has been used, it has been referenced, you know. So they're saying that they are admitting to using AI tools and stuff. Everything is on that declaration, but that's just the process that I use for my students. As a faculty, we use the same approach, and that is in the learner guide as well, all our learner guides. Okay, so Now using your voice as an author, right? And we kept speaking about your voice as an author, as a researcher. So putting in your voice in your writing. So when a student is reading a text which uses many sources, one of the difficulties they seem to experience is how to detect different voices and what the author's stance is with these voices, because different people write in different styles, and you need to know what the author is trying to convey. So it's the author's voice versus your own voice and the opinions that are coming across. Because remember, you are writing as an argument, and also you want to avoid plagiarism in that you don't want to repeat what the author is saying and use the exact words. This is why we say you have to write in your own words, your own voice needs to come across. You writing what an author is saying is not your voice, but use the author to concur with what you are saying, agree with what you are saying. Addressing some of the plagiarism developmentally, assisting students understand what your plagiarism policy is for either your respective universities, faculties, schools, departments, etc. Sharing the meaning between students and supervisors as to what constitutes as plagiarism. That is why I said, starting from the honors level, even students coming in at a doctoral level still need to be taught this is what plagiarism is, because some of them actually still do that. You would think these are mature students, experience that research, they know what plagiarism is, and they will not do that or write or plagiarize in their work. But funny enough, it comes across. Because when you put that Turnitin report and it highlights an entire paragraph, we already know. You use ChatGPT, it's being highlighted. You just copied and pasted what information was given to you. And some students go as far as taking a text from a book or a journal, an entire paragraph or two paragraphs, putting it in there thinking we're not going to take it up. And they learn from it. They learn a very, very hard lesson from it. All right, assisting students understand the importance of referencing authors. So just because you take the entire, and this is what the misconception is, they write the sentence not in their own words, take it exactly how it is in the text, put it there, and because I put a reference, I'm not plagiarizing because I reference the author. No, it does not work that way. You still put it in your own words and then reference the same author. Some of you may ask me, are quotes allowed? Yes, quotes are allowed, and there's a way of referencing a quote. So you can write the entire quote and then you can reference an author, but there's different styles of referencing techniques that you use for quotes, for blogs, for websites, different aspects that you are using. All right, so quotes are written in a certain way and are allowed. Guide students in developing comprehensive and summarizing strategies, including concepts or cognitive mapping, known as mind mapping. So how do they summarize the work that they have? Show students how to identify multiple voices in text and how to reference these different authors. So you're using different authors. Those multiple voices are the various authors that we have, and how to reference correctly. Encourage students to read original key theorists in the discipline in which their research is located. Discuss examples of well-written literature reviews. So I also, as a practice for the students at the honors level, I give them examples of how a literature review should be written. And there's different styles because different students have different ways of writing. So I give them different templates, different styles of writing, and this is how they can adapt their writing and also come up with new ways of writing the literature review. Also show your students how to use affordances of new technologies to avoid plagiarism. So again, generative AI, use it responsibly. Which takes us to your exercise that you have today, this afternoon. We're going to take a break just now. Assignment 3 is broken down into 2 parts. Also, you guys need to pay attention to the rubric that is used and how you're going to be marked and the marks that you're going to get for each section, right? So from assignment 1 to assignment 2, this is now assignment 3. You need to be cognizant of the rubric that is used to mark your assignments, right? So you seem to have handled it last week in a group. Again, you can help each other out, form your groups either this afternoon or tomorrow or during the week. Assignment 3, I'm going to set out, I'm back on Monday. I return to Johannesburg on Monday. So when I return, I'm going to post all your assessment dates. Okay, I know I'm delayed on that. I have not put up the assessment dates, so it'll tell you when all your assignments are due. That is why I said work together, have the assignments done. So I'm hoping last week you got 1 and 2 done. Now we can sit and work on assignment 3 and then have it upload. But I'll give you proper dates from Monday. I think the submission links, Lorenzo, if you can just verify all the submission links are open for all these activities and assignments for the students to upload. Okay, I'm sure that when Lorenzo is back in the venue, we can ask him. He's the coordinator for this particular module. All right, so let's look at the assignments and then we take another break for lunch and then we come back and start unit 4. The session is a bit longer, like I said, because last week we had a very short session due to me traveling. But yeah, we'll take our breaks, refresh, and then come back. So assignment 3 now is in 2 parts. Part 1 is where activity 3.1 constitutes part 1 of this assignment. Writing the short paragraph in response to any of the 3-4 of the questions based on the role of the reader that we did at the beginning, right? Where the role of the reader was a text participant, a text analyst, and so on, right? Constitutes 9 marks, a short paragraph, 80 to 100 words. Each paragraph should indicate understanding of the aspects of the role of the researcher to which it responds. So take each of those roles and dissect it and a paragraph on each response, right? So you're only choosing 3 of the 4 that's there, not all. Then part 2 relates to activity 3.2. You do not need to include the article or book chapter, or because remember at activity 3.2 we said you need to look for a specific article or paragraph, either short article, book chapter, etc. You don't need to include it here, but we need you to dissect it. The 2-part task is to firstly describe what the students are likely to find in that article. What is complex and how do you advise the students on how to address those complexities that they are experiencing. The strategy for assisting students may be based on ideas introduced in this entire Unit 3, or maybe a strategy on your own, something that was not reflected in Unit 3, but you think is a good approach, or you can combine the 2, and that's a total of 6 marks. So both the difficulties and the strategies used to assist students need to be clearly described, and the strategy needs to be a plausible response to the difficulties that they are experiencing, taking into consideration the rubric that is used to mark, which is this, if you can see my cursor. And then when we come back from lunch break, we will move on to Unit 4, which shouldn't be quite long because we did a lot on reading, but yeah, we'll take it step by step. This is now preparing the student for writing. We guided them on reading. Now we're going to we read, we organized the information. Now we're going to take that information and start writing our chapters. Up until this point, are we good? Take a break. Also, if you need to do the evaluations, if you haven't finished it, do the module and teaching evaluation that's on Moodle right now. for this module. I think it's open for last semester's module because some of you haven't completed. Eureka, you said you were experiencing an error. I think you're experiencing an error because you need to check your registration. I've only got 4 students registered for this module, from what I can see. Lorenzo can confirm that with us. So one of you, I'm not sure whether it's you, Eureka, because you joined late, or one of the other students is not linked to Moodle.
I have received a notification saying that I am registered,
Okay.
but I'm also experiencing, like last week when I wanted to join the groups, I couldn't. It was giving me a something error. Also an error message. I have sent a message. I actually only sent it yesterday, so I'll see. But as far as I know,
We'll try and sort that out. Yeah, we'll try and sort it out. But it means that there is an error somewhere, either with your registration or linking you to the modules. Yeah, there is something that's missing somewhere. All right. So it is 12:09. Tentatively 12:10. How long of a lunch break do you want to take? And then we come back and continue with Unit 4 and try to finish as much as we can. Can we be back by 12:45? Is that okay? Have a bit of a stretch and lunch and whatever else you need to do. Also doing the evaluations. It will take you about less than 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you.